So good morning. Yeah, it's always lovely to get to sit in the audience when people introduce me and talk about the triplets because I get to hear the response that you all have, and I have that same response every day still. Yes, I have 3 human babies that I grew at one time. So my name is Mandi. I'm the Director of Safety for Associated General Contractors of Washington. Before we get into any more content, a couple of things to note. First and foremost, we're recording this, and this will be made available at a later date, and it'll also be translated. And also throughout the room, you'll see on the pillars, we have posted QR codes that will take you to some content as well as my information and some other resources. So please avail yourself of all of that. Before we get into today's content, I think it's really important and relevant that we acknowledge everyone's psychological safety in this room. And honestly, in a room this big, I can make a lot of eye contact, I'm really good at that, but I can't check in on all of you and make sure that you all are doing okay. So I would just ask that if any part of what I'm sharing today feels heavy or uncomfortable, that's okay. I promise you not everything that I'm going to talk about today is going to be heavy or uncomfortable. But please, please do us all the favor of checking your own psychological safety. What that means is if this makes you feel uncomfortable, it is okay to look down and zone out. You're not going to hurt my feelings. If you need to stand up and walk around in the back, that's totally fine. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I think that it's really important that we have these conversations. Some of this is uncomfortable. But I think moreover, what I want to leave you all with is a sense of hope that we can do better as an industry. We can take better care of ourselves, better care of our teams. We can create inclusive workplaces that make us all feel seen and heard, but that every day that we wake up and we feel a sense of pride in the work that we do. And I think that that was evidenced by the commentary earlier today. There's a huge sense of pride in the work that you all are doing. But also, let's do it in a way where we all go home and feel good about ourselves too. So I want to start with just some statistics. Again, not all of what I'm going to share today is going to be a bummer, I promise. But it is relevant. So I want to talk to you a little bit about mental health and workplace violence because those are both issues that we experience in construction more so than the average. Construction males have 5 times the national average suicide rate. Now, I'm from Washington State. In Washington State, in 2018, in our state, in construction alone, we lost 18 construction workers to on-the-job fatalities. That was 2018, so this is pre-pandemic. In that same calendar year of 2018 in Washington State, we lost 125 of our construction brothers and sisters to suicide. So when we talk about why this is important, we often talk about making sure that each one of us gets to go home safe from work. But we also have an obligation to make sure that we all get to come to work safe from whatever is going on in here, right? And let's be honest, those are pre-pandemic numbers. In 2020, in my state alone, we lost 16 construction workers to on-the-job deaths. Of those 16, 6 were mental health related. We had 3 on-the-job drug overdoses in my state in construction alone, and we had 3 on-the-job suicides. And so I get challenged a lot when I have spent the better part of the last 2 years traveling around the country doing talks like these on mental health, suicide prevention, Jobsite culture, and inclusion. And I get a lot of people that want to say, oh, we should be talking about mental health because this isn't a workplace issue. And so I really want you to think about that. Think about, in my state alone, in construction, those 6 job sites where workers died either by drug overdose or by suicide. Think about every single one of those workers that has to show up every day to that job and see the place where they lost one of their brothers and sisters to something that is really, for the most part, unnecessary, and we have a role to play in this. So, as much as it's uncomfortable at times to talk about these statistics, it's also critically important that we do have these conversations and that we acknowledge it. And one of our major contributing factors is stigma. We don't talk about it. We don't even necessarily know sometimes when somebody dies by suicide. And so that's part of the bridge that we need to gap here, is being able to have these conversations. Be honest about our statistics. Be honest about the fact that it is natural and normal as a human function. Part of this journey of life is to struggle. We all have had struggles. So it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to not be okay. What's not okay is obviously to give up, or to see somebody struggling and look the other way. So the other thing that I wanted to point out here, just statistically in California, is a pretty relevant number. There are 4,100 suicides in California on average annually. And that's a number that I think most people don't recognize or realize is going on. So it's a pervasive issue. It's still going on. Now, with regards to workplace violence nationally, we have 5,300 roughly on average fatal workplace injuries every year. But workplace violence deaths account for almost 800 of those 5,300. So we're talking almost a quarter of, or a sixth of the workplace fatalities are workplace violence related. Now, there's a lot of reasons why in construction workplace violence might come to pass, right? And oftentimes we may think of, when we talk about workplace violence, we may think of, an electrician and a painter got into it on the job, right? I used to work for an electrical contractor, and our electricians and the painters never used to seem to get along, so that's always my go-to example. But if you've got, a trade-on-trade frustration or issue, that's what we think of most often. But now we also have additional challenges in our industry of dealing with the general public. We've got people outside our jobs that are either, bringing hazards to us, whether it's needles or drug paraphernalia or other things, or they're actually aggressing towards us and creating a violent situation to us. And so there's a lot more factors that we have to worry about in construction now than we ever used to in the past. So I think that that's also relevant, is being able to recognize those hazards and be aware and alert. So let's talk a little bit more about contributing factors. I mentioned stigma. Stigma is a big word for hush, we don't want to talk about it. And so stigma happens because we feel a sense of shame. We feel a sense of not wanting people to see us be vulnerable, not wanting people to see us be less than. And so stigma also is fostered in cultures like what we have in construction, right? In construction, how often do we stand around and talk about our feelings? Yeah, it's not our typical behavior, right? In fact, we also have some other contributing factors, one of which is alcohol and substance abuse and misuse. So, it's pretty common to come in on a Monday after a weekend and joke with your friends about how you tied one on and you had a few drinks over the weekend. But it's less common for us to come in on a Monday and talk about how we practice self-care, right? We don't talk about the good things that we take care of ourselves with. And this is not to say, don't drink or whatever. It's literally to say, are we using that as a crutch? Because in construction, especially culturally in construction, we don't talk about our feelings. We don't talk about what's going on with us personally for the most part. And if we do, the natural response from people is what? Rub some dirt in it, suck it up. We don't talk about our feelings here, right? We don't do that here. And so by doing that and by having those challenges and those struggles to communicate feelings and emotion, we're adding to the stigma. We're making it harder for somebody that might be in a period of struggle to come forward and say, this is what's going on with me. Or you see somebody struggling, and what do? Instead of reaching out with empathy and care and concern, we're like, what the heck is wrong with you? Like, man up and do your job. I've heard those words a lot of times, and that's not helping with those stigma issues, and it's pushing people towards trying to numb that emotional pain with things like alcohol and drugs. That's how we get into this. The other contributing factor to our alcohol and drug use issues in construction, and let me tell you, construction is still having issues. We still have an opioid overdose and opioid addiction problem in our industry. And part of that is we have very physically demanding work, right? We're out here toiling, we're using our bodies, and then we get home and we want to be able to relax, and we can't because our body hurts. And so we numb the physical pain with alcohol or drugs or medications, and then that fuels an addiction that we can't break, which then fuels mental health struggles, which then leads to a higher incidence of suicide and depression. So they're all very, very interrelated. So when we talk about a lack of coping and resilience skills in construction, I oftentimes do a lot of talk on self-care. So when I say the word self-care, what do you guys think of? The gym? That's awesome. What's that? Eat good, yes. Fuel your body. Hydrate. One of the things that we don't do as a society, and especially in construction that we don't do well, is rest. So as human beings, we all need rest. This is a foundational part of our resilience. Rest helps us get over colds, get over illnesses, get over all these things. So it stands to reason that rest will help you overcome stressful and emotional times and depression issues or anything like that. So rest is critically important. But all too often, people think of self-care as, getting a massage or going shopping or, those other items that we talked about, right? Rest and hydration and food. But I'm going to also challenge you that self-care is also about accountability. Self-accountability. Setting yourself up for success, making sure that you build the right habits, that you're holding yourself accountable to those good habits so that you get healthier, so that you get stronger, so that you get the rest that you need. And furthermore, as human beings, we need challenge. We need we grow through challenges. However, oftentimes, and we'll do a show of hands here in a second, but oftentimes it's a lack of goal setting and a lack of a clear trajectory for our lives. And when we don't have those goals and we don't have a trajectory or a plan or a path, we struggle. So how many of you all, when you were, say, 5 or 10 years old, knew what you wanted to be when you grew up? Raise your hands. If you knew what you wanted to be when you grew up. That's all right, I got 4 kids, I could do this all day, y'all. Okay, so of those, we got 4 people that knew what they wanted to do. That's awesome. Of those people that knew what they wanted to do, keep your hand raised if you're doing what you said you wanted to do when you were that age. Oh, cool. All right, I love you. Let's be honest. We don't often, we'll say that we want to do X, Y, or Z when we grow up, or we say, I'm pretty sure everybody in here is like, well, in 5 years, I want to be doing whatever it is, right? Whatever the goal is. But then what happens? Those 5 years slip by, and then they turn to 10, and then they turn to 20. And how does that happen? Happens because life, right? Life happens, and it just challenges us outside of what we planned on doing. And so, again, back to the self-care, it's about setting goals for yourselves and making a plan of attack so that you get there. So then we'll also talk briefly about Jobsite culture. I've said it before. The culture of care program that was mentioned earlier was originally born out of a diversity, equity, and inclusion situation that we were having in Seattle. And I'm going to be really, really frank with you all. It started because we had more than one job site in the greater Seattle area where nuisance were found on the job. And this happened in 2016. And I'm going to tell you right now, I knew when these instances happened, before we wrote the Culture of Care program, I knew that there was a definite need for more conversation about race and inclusion and equity in our workplaces. But I was so devastated to find out that here we are in 2016, 2017, and that anyone would feel that that was appropriate or acceptable. And that anyone would lower themselves to singling somebody out because of their outward appearance, their race, their gender, whatever. And that we are capable of still being construction and still doing things the way that we do them, but doing it in a way where people show up every day and they feel safe to be who they are. They feel like their knowledge and their experience is what they're going to be judged on, not the color of their skin, their gender, or any other factors that they can't change about themselves. And so we built Culture of Care for that specific purpose, to talk more about inclusion and more about how to challenge people to show up for those that need advocacy and need bystander intervention. So it's also about psychological safety. You'll hear me use that phrase a lot. Psychological safety is just about being able to feel safe in who you are. Being able to, look at me, I'm covered in tattoos, blazing red hair, and I'll stand on stage all day long and talk about these kinds of things because I think it's really important that we celebrate what makes us different, but we look for what makes us similar. We find those common grounds where we can say, hey, you know what? You may have a totally different career background than me. You may have come by this work in a different avenue, right? Some of us went to school to be in construction, myself included. Some of us didn't, and that's okay. And it's not about who had a better path. It's the fact that we're both here right now, and we're both working on a common goal. So we focus on those things and not the differences, and recognize that if a person comes to our workplace with a different set of life experiences, career experiences, that's not a disadvantage. That's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for us to learn from them and them to learn from us, and for us to have more robust and creative solutions to the problems that we see on the job, because we have different mindsets and different life experiences that color the way that we look at a challenge so that we can come up with better solutions. That's what it should be about. So I'll also talk briefly about bystander intervention because I think this is really, really important. All too often when we talk about empowerment, we talk about empowerment as though we want to empower victims or minorities or others to speak up for themselves. And yes, we want people to feel empowered, but I'm going to challenge every one of us in here today that empowerment is also about being able to stand up and speak up when you see something that you know is wrong and not waiting for somebody to defend themselves. Because we all have the power to nip all of that in the bud and do better and support one another. So we'll talk a little bit about solutions. Like I said, we do have a mental health problem in construction. We do have a substance misuse and abuse problem in construction. It is a known fact statistically. But there are things that we can do better. So when I wrote my master's thesis a couple summers ago on mental health and suicide prevention interventions for construction employers, I drew upon my 20-year career in construction of helping employers with safety and health to tie in the higher concepts of mental health and psychological safety into a model that employers can use. And so through that process, I knew that there wasn't going to be a time where anybody in my industry would pick up a 50-page master's thesis research paper and read that and decide how to deploy that in their organization. That's crazy talk. So I boiled it down into an 8-part best practices guide, and that's actually available through the AGC of America QR code that you see on the flyers on the wall. So I'm just going to very briefly talk about some of these best practices. So the first one is training in mental health. We're doing some of that today. There is definitely a lot more that we can talk about with regard to mental health than what we're going to be able to cover today. Promoting of your employee assistance program and insurance offerings, doing a stand down like we're doing right now, de-escalation training. So show of hands, how many of us in this room right now would know how to appropriately respond or would feel comfortable responding if somebody showed up to work and asked you or said to you, I spent last night on my couch with a bottle of whiskey and a shotgun or a handgun in my hand, and I don't know necessarily why I didn't pull the trigger. If somebody came to you and was in that level of despair, and they were willing to open up to you and say those words or tell you that they were struggling in that level, how many of us feel comfortable right now with how we would respond? Good. Good. Okay, so I don't ever leave any talk about mental health without giving you a simple de-escalation technique. The first thing you need to have ready at your disposal is the 988 national hotline, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So everybody in this audience should have the phone number 988 saved in their phone. It functions just like 911. You can also text it. So that's step one of any de-escalation. There are multiple different clinically proven de-escalation techniques. I'm giving you my most simple one. If someone is brave enough to come to you and tell you that they are struggling and brave enough to tell you that they are in pain emotionally, the first thing you do is you respond with empathy. Wow, man, that was really brave. I can't believe that you're going through this. I'm really sorry that you're struggling like this. I can't imagine what that must be like. Second thing you're going to do is be gracious for them being brave enough to come to you. Thank you so much for trusting me with this. And you know what? I don't feel comfortable letting you struggle like this alone. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to step over here to this job trailer where nobody's at, or we're going to go out here to this parking lot. I'm going to dial 988 on my phone. You need to know that 988 is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with trained professionals. It is free, it's 100% confidential, and you can call them as often as you like or you need to. 988 also, for those of you that don't know, is not just for a person in crisis. It's for those of us who care about a person in crisis. My 15-year-old daughter came home from school when she was 11 and said she would rather die than go back to school again. And that's what I used 988 for. Well, back then it was 741, but in any event, so you need to relay to that person, hey, thank you for trusting in me and sharing that with me. And I care so much about you that I'm going to start this process. I'm going to help you get the help that you need because I care about you and I want you to be okay. And I want you to have resources. And then you go and you take them and you begin the call and you say, you know what, as soon as you feel comfortable, you can dismiss me and you can continue this conversation with them. In that process, you've de-escalated them, you've shown them empathy and care. You've acknowledged the bravery that it took for them to come forward. You've given them tools and resources. But you notice through that whole process, one thing didn't happen. You didn't take ownership of their personal problems. You didn't become responsible for what their struggle was. You didn't put yourself in a position of giving advice that may be, bad or confusing or the wrong steps. All you did was say, you know what, I care, and I'm here for you. So that's the easiest de-escalation technique that I can offer you. There's plenty of training available for a more in-depth process. All right, the next one on our best practices list is mental health assessments. How many of us have taken a mental health assessment before? Awesome. Okay, my absolute favorite mental health assessment tool is called mantherapy.org. It is a tongue-in-cheek, comedic look. So it's a comedian that's actually walking you through mental health assessment. And he says stuff like, not everything can be fixed with duct tape. It's absolutely hilarious, it's lighthearted, so it makes it easier. But what's best is it walks you through a mental health assessment and points you to resources, okay? So I would encourage you either through that, through NAMI, there's multiple different online free mental health assessment tools. You can't fix what you don't measure, so it's really important to take the time and evaluate those. Lastly, I have normalizing the conversation. What does that mean? Normalizing the conversation just means we've got to be able to talk about it. We've got to be able to share that, hey, you know what? Not everything about life is a walk in the park, and I've had my struggles too, but here I am on the other side of it, and I'm doing better. Or, hey, I'm still trudging through it, and it kind of sucks, but I'm doing it, right? All of those things help us take better care of one another. And then we also need to have posters and signage just to provide access for folks. So When you see posters and signage on the job with regard to mental health or accessing EAP or suicide prevention, not only is it important to have those, outwardly facing, it's also important to have them in psychologically safe places like restrooms where people can take a look at them and access those resources. But also, I challenge all of you, if you see something like that, don't tamper with it. You never know. You really never know which life you're going to save. You may not feel like you need those resources, but I can tell you countless stories. And one of my favorite ones is one that happened just recently. I was in Kentucky doing a presentation, and my counterpart that runs the Missouri chapter of AGC's safety program was also doing a talk that week. And he and I were kind of commiserating on, we're doing talks on mental health, and sometimes it feels like it falls flat and it feels like people aren't really grabbing onto the content. And he said, I handed out a bunch of hard hat stickers and stuff from the employer. The employer created these resources, and it's like I was handing these out, and people were kind of joking about it and laughing them off and whatever. And a couple weeks later, he calls me, and he says that one of the people in the audience it was a much smaller group than this, so it was one of the gentlemen, and he was kind of gruff, and he was acting like he didn't want to be talking about mental health or suicide prevention or any of that subject matter, and he was pretty much like, this is a waste of my time. And Brandon still gave him a handful of hard hat stickers and said, hey, take these, share them with your crew, whatever. Well, Brandon was back there for a follow-up, and the guy came down from the job and said, hey man, I really need to talk to you. And pulled Brandon aside and said, I took those materials and I actually took one of the stickers home, and it was on my counter in the kitchen. And over the weekend, my 16-year-old daughter took every pill in the house with the attempt to end her life. And she went into that kitchen afterwards, realizing that nobody was home to help her. And she saw that sticker sitting on the counter, and she called 988. She got taken to the hospital, and she got the help that she needed, and she's getting better. So if you're sitting through this conversation so far today of me talking to you about mental health and suicide prevention, and you're like, that's not my problem, that's not my issue, I'm fine. That's okay. That's great, and I'm happy that you're not having struggles. However, you literally do not know what life you're going to save by sharing the information, by having 988 in your phone, by putting 988 in the phones of the people that you care about, encouraging people to access those resources, encouraging people to take mental health assessments, and being bold and brave enough to have conversations about mental health with your teams. And it doesn't all have to be heavy. We don't always have to be talking about, suicide prevention or depression or those kinds of things. One way that we can help is by having conversations with our teams about self-care or healthy hobbies or things that you enjoy doing, so that you help encourage other people to find joy in life and find healthy hobbies and healthy outlets. So we talked about stigma reduction. Again, I can't stress enough that we are different on purpose. If you think about it, what a boring world this would be if we were all exactly the same and we approached everything the same. So in dealing with the cultural issues and the stigma, just being able to acknowledge that a person's differences are actually something to be celebrated and something that will actually challenge you to be a better human. Instead of looking at people who are different from you or who may be struggling with mental health issues as a burden or something to be looked down upon, it really should be more looking at them as there is something that I can learn from this person. That they add value, and I'm going to get better as a human being by knowing them and by working with them. And that your sincere hope should be that in interacting with others, you're helping them grow and do better as well. So other things with regard to mental health stigma reduction is asking people instead of assuming, right? Instead of just assuming that you know or understand what someone's about, go ahead and ask in a respectful way, but go ahead and ask and open the conversation up instead of having them feel like you're kind of a judging them. And then also, I would just challenge each of you to adjust your language. So very, very often we hear the words, commit suicide. Cancer patients don't commit cancer. Somebody that gets hurt on the job doesn't commit a workplace injury or accident. And so just a simple adjustment of our language can help be more inclusive to people. People die by suicide. They die because they're in an extreme amount of mental anguish and emotional anguish. And just imagine being in so much pain that you think the world is better off without you. It doesn't make logical sense to some of us, but that's literally what it is. They die from mental anguish. They're not committing a crime. They're not doing it to hurt other people. So the Culture of Care program I mentioned earlier, like I said, it was born out of some racial issues that had happened in the greater Seattle area that were really, unacceptable on every level, and really a thing that most of us thought would never happen in today's day and age. But what we realized is we often talk about standards for safety and health. We talk about standards for how we should perform our work, but we don't really talk about what those standards look like when it comes to interpersonal relations. And so we built the Culture of Care program, and the idea was to have an acronym. So the word CARE stands for an acronym. Is C is commit. So it's committing your resources, committing yourself personally to a respectful, inclusive workplace where people are seen and heard. A is for attract. We all are very aware of the fact that we have a skilled labor shortage in our country. We have less people wanting to get into trade-related jobs, which means we're struggling to find workers to do great big projects like this. So attract is not just about attracting people to the industry. It's also about those of us that are already in the industry. How do we talk about the work that we do? Do we say, oh, I'm just a construction worker, or do we talk about the work that we do in pride? Right? Do we tell people you can make a livable wage working in construction and you get to be a part of some really cool stuff, right? I mean, I loved driving around and being able to point out to my kids, I was a part of that. I helped with that tunnel. I was a part of that. And be able to do those kinds of things. Do we talk up our industry? And instead of telling the kids that their only option is to go to college, that there's a lot of options, some that do include college, that put you right into a career in this industry, right? So that's attract. Are we attracting the right people into our industry? R is for retain. So once we get people into this industry, what are we doing to retain them? Do we have a workplace culture that supports people wanting to stay here and work? I have heard countless stories of people that were like, oh, I want to work in construction, or go through an apprenticeship program, and then they turn out and they're like, you know what, this is crap. The way people talk to each other, the way this is handled, the job site culture is crap, and I don't want to be a part of it. And then they move on to other things. So we've got to retain those people. We've got to retain all that talent and all that knowledge. And then last is empower. And again, I mentioned it earlier. Empowerment isn't just about empowering those that are victims or those that are excluded to speak up. Empowerment is also really about every single one of us has responsibility and owes it to ourselves and our coworkers to create an inclusive and psychologically safe workplace. So Culture of Care, there's tons of different resources, videos, toolbox talks. There's a personal pledge on the AGC of America website. So when you get into today's agenda, there's actually a link that you can do the personal pledge if you'd like to. So I was asked to talk a little bit more about de-escalation, more from a workplace violence or potential conflict scenario. And so I would like to, if I could, is there anybody brave enough to be a volunteer and come up here?
Oh man, I'd like to.
There's bound to be at least one. There's almost always one in every crowd. It's great. Just stand here. So we're going to talk about so if there's conflict going on, do we look like we're in conflict? Should we try harder to be in conflict? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so if we were in conflict, how can you adjust your body language to look more intimidating? More intimidating. Yep. Yep, there it is. You look like you're going to fight a bear, right? You're like, I'm squaring up. Okay, so let's flip this over. How can you adjust your body language to look like you are less intimidating or less desiring conflict? Some of us are more hardwired for conflict. Yeah. So if we were engaged in some sort of disagreement and you were like this and you were, stepping up, then you're gonna have that intimidation factor. But if you don't want there to be conflict, or you're trying to resolve the conflict by making yourself smaller, right? So stepping back, standing on your heels instead of on your toes, being able to put your hands down and relaxed or in your pockets instead of squared up, right? So those are all examples of good body language where you can help diffuse, right? And making yourself smaller. So good job, thank you. Yep, you're good. So there's always one, and so I'm super proud of you, my friend. Okay, so other things that you can use to de-escalate is not just your body language. Now, as a safety professional, I learned very early on, if I came out and I wanted to ask somebody a question about what they were doing with regard to safety and I felt like maybe something was going wrong, I didn't come out with my arms crossed in front of me and stand there with my hip cocked. I probably changed my entire facial features, right? You ask a question instead of telling somebody that they're wrong. See, those are all de-escalation techniques that happen before the conflict even arises. But once the conflict has happened, you can use other tools like distraction. Let's say that there's conflict going on and it's uncomfortable or you realize that it's really out of control. You can use distraction and be like, hey, you know what, Bob, why don't you come over here with me? We're gonna go check this out really quick. I need your opinion on this. To get Bob out of a situation where either Bob's the aggressor or Bob's the victim, but either way, you're removing him with a distraction. The other option is to literally remove them by saying, hey, you know what, until this is diffused, you've got to go. Reporting. Does everybody here know how to report a challenge like a workplace violence issue or a disagreement that's getting out of hand? Does everybody know how to report that? Who to report it to? Show of hands. You know who to talk to? HR. Poor HR, they get the brunt of everything, don't they? So those are some things that you can happen once they occur. But what's more important than mopping up a mess? Just like with safety, prevention is more important. So when we talk about prevention, it's about using language, right? You have control. You don't have control over how other people may act or respond, but you have control over you. So if you see something escalating and getting out of hand, you have the control over yourself to be able to back that down. Other prevention tactics, choose your language wisely, right? Being able to understand where you're at and what role you play in that. And then also setting things up for success by communicating a lot ahead of time. Oftentimes when we have conflict on job sites, whether it's trade stacking and people being frustrated for being in each other's bubble or other things, if we had done a better job communicating ahead of time or pre-planning ahead of time, we wouldn't have found ourselves in the frustrating position. So there's that piece of it, but also knowing frustrations are still going to happen. That doesn't give us a right to escalate. We can be frustrated, but we still have to be collaborative. Okay? A couple of final things before I turn you guys loose. The platinum rule, I think, is really important when we're talking about inclusion, when we're talking about prevention of potential issues. The platinum rule, how many of you have ever heard the platinum rule? Okay, so growing up, we probably heard the golden rule from our parents often. Treat others the way that we would like to be treated. The platinum rule just takes that one step further. The platinum rule says, treat others the way that they want to be treated. Because how I want to be treated in this life, I'm pretty certain isn't the same as every other person in this room. And so the way that you're successful with the platinum rule is by getting to know other people, getting to know how they operate, how they think, what experience and knowledge they bring to the table, and how you can maximize on that and connect with that. So again, I talked a lot about self-care, mental health assessments, building your own resilience. I cannot stress enough the importance of rest, especially in the work that we do, and the amount of hours and the commute time and all the other challenges that we face in construction. Rest is really important. Taking good care of yourself, making sure that you practice good personal self-care. They're all really important. But one other thing that I would challenge you, something I'm not very good at myself, is asking for and accepting help. If you're struggling, being able to say, hey, I'm not doing all right, and I need to take a break, or I need to step away from this, and actually accepting the help. So in closing, I really just want to say, it is an absolute privilege to work in construction. I love what I get to do in this industry, and you'll hear me say that a lot. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, and I post a lot of stuff, and almost always I say in there, I get to do this. And so you have the power in here to choose how you frame the experiences that you have. And so you get to work in this industry. We get to build some of the greatest things. We get to build our communities. We have a lot of opportunity in construction, and for that I'm incredibly thankful. But I will say just this, our world, our industry, this community, what you're building here is better with you in it. So if you are somebody who is struggling or having a rough time right now, please know to hold on, because the pain ends, and we're all better with you being here. And again, when I talk about labor shortage, when I talk about some of these other things, it all boils down to we have the opportunity to look and see each other's humanity, celebrate the good work that we all do, celebrate each other, less focus on what the differences are, less focus on what we think other people's weaknesses or failures are, and more focus on the things that make us all better together. So I can't thank everybody here enough for dedicating time to this today. For you all, just even being here. Thanks for the 60 dozen donuts too, by the way. That was pretty impressive. Right? So, but I challenge every one of you before you leave here today, or maybe on your ride home. I challenge every one of you to identify at least one self-care or mental health best practice that you can deploy for yourself. I challenge you to take better care of yourself, because we need you here. I challenge you to look for ways that you can take better care of the people around you. And I challenge you to become more informed on mental health just in general, because in those ways, we will shift the needle and we'll start to see a reduction in the losses that we're experiencing in construction. So thank you all for your attention. Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'll be around if anybody has